Hercules, from Stories of Greece, written by Templeton Institute for Neurology, narrated by Catherine Carter. As well as being one of the most famous heroes of ancient times, Hercules was probably the most beloved. There have been more stories told about him than any other hero. As we have already discovered, Hercules' father, Zeus, was the ruler of the heavens and earth. That meant that Zeus could do just about anything he pleased, but as we also discovered in our last story, Zeus was not a very good husband to his wife, Hera, the queen of the gods. Zeus was always falling in love with beautiful nymphs, goddesses, and even mortal women, among them a beautiful Greek woman named Alcmene. When Alcmene's husband, Amphitryon, was away, Zeus sneaked around to see her as often as he could. Before long, Alcmene became pregnant with Zeus's child. Zeus's wife Hera became very angry to have been betrayed by her husband yet again. There was very little Hera could do to take out her rage on her husband, so very often she would vent her fury on his many mistresses. Alcmene was no exception. When the time came for Alcmene to give birth, Hera tried to prevent the baby from being born. After a great struggle, for this was a very large baby, Alcmene gave birth to her son anyway. She decided to name him Hercules, which means glorious gift of Hera in Greek. Now Hera was already angry that she couldn't prevent the birth of this baby, but this act of defiance made her angrier still. Zeus learned of Hera's crazed anger and devised a cunning but brilliant plan. In the evenings when Hera was asleep, Zeus took little Hercules and put him at the breast of his wife, the divine goddess. Having suckled the divine milk of the goddess, Hercules then became immortal. When Hera discovered what Zeus had done, she herself devised a plan to pay her husband back for his infidelity and trickery by making the rest of Hercules' life as miserable as she could. The first thing Hera tried to do was formulate a plan to kill the baby. She found a snake charmer and purchased a bag of poisonous snakes, which she placed into Hercules' crib. But miraculously, little Hercules showed the first signs of his amazing strength and played happily with the snakes before strangling them. As he grew, Hera dedicated most of her time to making the life of Hercules a living hell. Since he had become one of the immortals, she could not kill him, but she could make his life miserable. When Hercules grew up and had become a great warrior, he married Megara, and they had 2 children. Hercules and Megara were very happy, but life didn't turn out for them the way they had hoped. Hera's cruelty knew no bounds. She was determined to destroy his happiness, and so she cast a spell on Hercules, which sent a fit of madness and uncontrollable rage to him. Hercules was immensely tall and strong and skilled with weapons, and in this madness, nobody could control him or oppose him. Helpless and insane with rage, he slaughtered his wife and his children. Of course, Hercules was stricken by grief and remorse at what he had done and appealed to the Oracle of Delphi to advise him what to do. Now, dear children, I must explain about the Oracle at Delphi. Back in ancient Greece, when people had to make decisions, they consulted the gods. They would do this by drawing straws, interpreting dreams, throwing dice, and analyzing simple everyday things like sneezes, thunderbolts, and flying birds. But for matters of absolute importance, they wanted to hear the words of the gods. To do this, they built shrines and temples in honor of these gods, so that an oracle or representative of the gods could speak to them. The people believed that the oracle possessed magical powers, could answer any question, and could even predict the future. They built the most important of all the shrines around a sacred spring at Delphi. Getting to Delphi required either a long trek across the mountains or a sea voyage to the northern shore of the Gulf of Corinth. But no matter how hard the journey, thousands of visitors from Greece and all over the world sought guidance from the holy woman, called the Pythia, who spoke on behalf of the god Apollo at the Oracle of Delphi. So poor Hercules, who had been driven by madness to commit the terrible crime of murdering his family, also sought the wisdom of the oracle. He begged the oracle to guide him in what he could do to make up for the tragedy and the heartbreaking guilt he carried with him. The answer he received was not that he must serve King Eurystheus or Mycenae, who also happened to be his cousin, for 12 years. After this time, the oracle promised that Hercules would be free of guilt and able to carry on his life. The king set 12 tasks for Hercules to carry out, and famously these became known as the 12 Labours of Hercules. So, dear children, would you like to hear of the amazing adventures of Hercules as he sought to clear his name and right his conscience? Let us begin with the first task. To kill the Nemean lion. The Nemean lion was an enchanted and ferocious beast that terrorized men and women in nearby towns. The lion captured women and took them as hostages back to its cave. Warriors from the surrounding area would come to the lion's cave to try to save the damsels in distress. The lion would pretend to be the prisoner, crying out in a woman's voice, luring the warrior into the cave where he would attack and kill the soldier, then devour the body. Hercules knew that killing the Nemean lion would be no easy feat, but he was prepared for battle. He wandered the area until he came to the town of Cleone. There he met a boy who said that if Hercules killed the Nemean lion and returned alive within 30 days, the town would sacrifice a lion to Zeus. But if he did not return within 30 days, or if he died, the boy would sacrifice himself to Zeus. This made Hercules even more determined to carry out the task. He did not want to be responsible for the death of another person. After all, he was still grieving the loss of his own wife and sons, at his own hand. While searching for the lion, Hercules prepared himself as best he could. His only weapons and ones he carried with him everywhere were a bronze sword and a golden dagger. But Hercules knew he would need more than just those to conquer this beast. He spent a week making a mighty bow and super strong arrows from the branches of an olive tree which he pulled out of the ground himself. He fashioned some razor-sharp flint to use as arrowheads. He spent the next few days and nights making a huge club from the heavy trunk of a tree. He studied the club with spikes made from more sharpened flint. Hercules wanted to make sure he was as strong as he could be, so he hunted wild boar, ate, exercised, and readied himself for what he knew would be an epic battle. When finally he saw the beast in front of its den, he shot one of his arrows into its golden fur, but he realized that the lion's hide was so tough that the arrow simply bounced off. He shot all of his arrows, but even using his superhuman strength, not one of them even nicked the lion's robust hide. After some time, Hercules watched, hidden as the lion returned to his cave. The cave had 2 entrances, one of which Hercules blocked with a large boulder. Then he entered the cave through the only remaining entrance. In those dark and close quarters, without any place for the lion to escape, Hercules was able to temporarily stun the beast by hitting it on the head with his club. Once it was down, he sliced at the monstrous lion's face with his sword, but even though the sword was incredibly sharp, it was useless against the creature and only made it angrier. Using his immense strength, Hercules threw aside his weapons and fought a mighty battle with his bare hands, wrestling the lion to the ground. It tried to claw and bite at Hercules' flesh, but he was such a great fighter that he was able to avoid any major injury. The battle continued for many days, and as the lion weakened, Hercules seemed to grow stronger. Finally, the lion was exhausted. Hercules saw his opportunity and thrust his arm down the lion's throat, choking it to death. Finally, it was done. After slaying the lion, Hercules knew he would need proof that he had indeed killed it. He tried to skin it with a knife from his belt, but of course, the lion's hide was too tough, so he failed. He then tried sharpening the knife with a stone, and even tried with the stone itself. All this time, the goddess Athena, Zeus's daughter and Hercules' half-sister, had been watching from her home in Mount Olympus. She saw the hero's plight and wanted to help. She disguised herself as an old woman and appeared before Hercules in the cave. She told him to use one of the lion's own claws to skin it and remove the pelt. It worked, and once the lion was skinned, Hercules put it on and wore it as a coat of armour for the rest of his days. When he returned to Cleone, on the 13th day, the townspeople were overjoyed. The young boy would not have to sacrifice himself, and Hercules, carrying the carcass of the lion on his shoulders, promised he would deliver it to King Eurystheus. When he finally made it back, King Eurystheus was amazed, but he was terrified too. He couldn't believe the incredible feats that Hercules had carried out, and he was now convinced that everyone was right. He was indeed the strongest being in the world. The king feared that Hercules might turn on him, so he forbade Hercules to ever again enter the city. In future, after carrying out the other 11 tasks, he was to display the results of his labours outside the city gates. He would use a messenger to tell Hercules what his tasks were to be, because of the frightened king had no wish to face Hercules personally. He even had a large bronze jar made, big enough to hide in, just in case he ever needed to. But he also warned Hercules that the tasks set for him would become more and more difficult. Then he sent Hercules off to complete his next quest, which was to destroy the Lernaean Hydra, a terrifying sea creature with deadly poisonous breath, and so many heads that nobody could even count them. So, dear children, what do you think about Hercules slaying the lion? Is he not the most spectacular warrior? But, as the king said, his tasks will now become more and more difficult. Will he be able to defeat beasts even more ferocious than the Nemean lion? We will find out, but for now, we must end our story here. Next time we come back, you will hear more of the labours of Hercules. I promise there will be more action and adventure, hideous monsters, plenty of mystery and intrigue, and lots of suspense as he tackles 11 more strange and dangerous tasks. And they are not just about conquering savage beasts. There will be other things that Hercules must do, tasks he will be assigned that will seem impossible. Hercules and the Second to Sixth Labours from Stories of Greece, written by Templeton Institute for Neurology, narrated by Catherine Carter. After Hercules had completed his first task and slain the lion, he delivered it back to King Eurystheus. The king became frightened of Hercules and thought that a warrior so strong and powerful might also turn on him. So he decreed that Hercules was not to enter the city again. Instead, he was to display the results of his labours outside the city gates. Through a messenger sent by the king, Hercules received word of his second task, to kill the Hydra. The Hydra was a terrible monster living in the swamps of Lerna. It had 9 ugly, ferocious heads and attacked its victims with poisonous venom. But one of these heads was immortal. This meant that if one of the mortal heads was cut off, another 2 heads would spring forth from the stump in its place. The Hydra lived in the swamps of Lerna. It was feared and loathed as it rose up and terrorized the countryside. It would attack cattle and even chase and eat children who came too close to the swamps to play. For many years, the farmers had to deal with the loss of their livestock, and many parents mourned the loss of their beloved children as they became prey for this awful creature. Hercules knew that this would be a challenge like no other. He knew that he couldn't simply shoot an arrow at the beast or bash it to death with his club. Hercules' nephew, Lolaeus, learned of his uncle's quests and offered to drive him in the chariot to Lerna. Lolaeus was a master charioteer and had won many races in the Olympics. Hercules agreed and they set off. Soon they arrived at the swamps of Lerna, and it was not long before Hercules caught sight of the monster as it rose from the swamp and reared its ugly head. Hercules lured the beast nearer to him and began to wrestle with one of its heads, but as he did this, another head began to bite him on the leg. Then another head would try to bite his torso. Hercules called upon Lolaeus for help. He would cut one of the monster's heads off and told Lolaeus to burn the neck at the stump. This sealed the wound and stopped the stump from growing another head, but before he did this, he dipped his arrows into the wounds, coating them with poisonous venom, so that he could use them as weapons in the future. When all 8 of the immortal necks were headless and sealed off, Hercules sliced off the immortal head and buried it underground, with a huge boulder on top to hold it down. Hercules and Lolaeus returned to Mycenae with the dead body of the Hydra and left it at the city gates, as Eurystheus had instructed. He sent Lolaeus inside to tell the king that he had completed his second task and to bring him news of the next one. For the third labour, Eurystheus ordered Hercules to bring him the hind of Cerynea. Now, before we go any further, children, let me explain what a hind is. Well, it is simply a red deer. But of course you would think that, for a mighty warrior like Hercules, shooting a deer would be a very easy task, but there were a few problems that made this task a little more complicated. This deer was sacred and a special pet to Diana, the goddess of hunting and the moon. Diana was the twin sister of Apollo, and also one of the daughters of Zeus, which means she was Hercules' half-sister. Naturally, Hercules did not want to risk upsetting Diana by hurting her beloved red deer, but after tracking the deer for a whole year, Hercules realized that to capture the deer, he may not be able to avoid it. He finally cornered the deer as she was about to cross a stream, and as she was about to leap away, he shot and injured her with his slingshot. He put the deer on his shoulders and turned to travel back towards Mycenae. As he hurried on his way, he was stopped in his tracks by Diana and Apollo. Diana was very angry because Hercules had tried to kill her sacred animal. She took the deer away from Hercules, and in her anger, she promised him the most severe of punishments. Hercules told her the truth. He told Diana the whole story, and that he had to obey the oracle and do the labours that Eurystheus had given him. Diana then took pity on Hercules. She cast aside her anger and healed the deer's wound. She allowed him to carry it back alive to Mycenae, as long as he returned it to his home in the forest where it belonged. Winter had come, and Hera and King Eurystheus decided that for Hercules' next task, the fourth labour, he would have to capture the Erymanthian boar. The Erymanthian boar was a sacred giant wild boar which lived high on top the Mount Erymanthos. In case you're not sure, children, a boar is a huge wild pig with a terrible temper, and razor-sharp, pointy tusks growing out of its mouth. This boar was a favourite of the gods and was often sent to carry out all of the nasty tasks that the gods and goddesses did not want to do, like destroying villages for not being respectful enough to certain gods. It would come crashing down from his den on the mountain, attacking men and animals all over the countryside, tearing them apart with its tusks and destroying everything in its path. So Hercules set off to capture this boar. Along the way, he decided to stop by and visit his friend Pholos, a friendly centaur. Now, a centaur is a creature that has the head, arms and torso of a man and the body and legs of a horse. Pholos and Hercules sat down to dinner and talked. Hercules asked Pholos for advice on how to defeat and capture the Erymanthian boar. Pholos told Hercules that he would be able to capture the boar if he chased him into the deep snow. Pholos gave Hercules a net to help with his quest and wished him well. With his friend's advice, Hercules set off to find the boar, and it wasn't long before he did. The boar was angry that someone had dared to come near his lair on the mountain. It charged at Hercules and its tusk pierced the top of his leg, impaling him. The wound was deep, and as the huge boar raised its head and ran, Hercules was carried along on its back, with the tusk still deeply embedded in his leg. As the boar ran deeper and deeper into the snow, it slowed down. Hercules saw this as his chance to wrap his mighty arms around it and squeeze tight. This knocked the wind out of the boar and brought it to the ground. Hercules carefully removed the tusk from his leg and packed the wound in ice and snow to numb the pain, then wrapped a cloth around it. He was too weak to carry the boar, so he wrapped the net around it and dragged it back to the palace of King Eurystheus. With the fourth task completed, Hercules awaited news of his next task. The fifth task was one that puzzled Hercules, but he was glad of it. He hoped he wouldn't have to battle any ferocious beasts, as his injured leg needed time to heal. The fifth task was to clean the Augean stables in one single day. This didn't seem like much of a task, I know, but these stables had not been cleaned in over 30 years, and they were home to thousands of cattle, sheep, goats and horses. Hercules was never one to shy away from hard work, and he welcomed the challenge. So Hercules travelled to see King Algos, and as he looked over the king's land, he realised that this was not only going to be as easy as it seemed. The stables were indeed filthy from many years of animal waste. But Hercules set to work tearing a big hole in the front of the stable yards, and next Hercules made a hole in the back wall of the stable yards. Hercules then dug a trench leading from the nearby river all the way to the front of the stable yards, where he had created the first opening. He then diverted the flow of the river into the front of the stable yards and out the rear of the stable yards, and back into the river, with taking all the filth along with it. This proved that Hercules was not only physically strong and powerful, but that he had an amazingly clever mind. He completed his task in less than the day allocated to him, and made his way back to Mycenae, taking King Algos' son with him, to prove to Eurystheus that he had indeed done what was asked of him. For the sixth labour, Hercules was to drive away an enormous flock of birds, which gathered at a lake near the town of Stymphalos. These strange and vicious birds were equal to lions or leopards in their fierceness. Arriving at the lake, which was deep in the woods, Hercules had no idea how to drive the huge gathering of birds away. The goddess Athena came to help him. Now, dear children, Athena was another of Zeus's daughters, making her another half-sister of Hercules. She was the goddess of wisdom, war, the arts, justice and skill. She gave him a pair of bronze noise-making clappers, similar to castanets, but these were no ordinary noisemakers. They had been made by an immortal craftsman. She then handed him a vest made from cork. Hercules wondered how a pair of noisemakers and a vest that was not even made from metal could protect or help him, but he took the gifts graciously. Climbing a nearby mountain, Hercules clashed the noisemakers loudly, scaring the birds out of the trees. They became angry at being disturbed and flew at Hercules, trying to pierce him with their sharp, ferocious beaks. But as they plunged at him, their beaks became stuck in the cork vest. Hercules was able to pluck them off and smash them with his club. With the 6th task complete, he gathered all of the birds in a pile, tied a rope around their legs, and carried them back to Mycenae. So, dear children, Hercules is well on his way to conquering the tasks set to him. He has completed 6 of the difficult labours, putting his life in danger several times. He has slain a dreadful lion, disposed of the hideous Hydra, managed to capture the goddess Diana's deer, and overcome the vicious Eurymanthian boar. Then he accomplished a seemingly impossible task and cleaned the Algeian stables in just 1 day, after which he killed the deadly Stymphalian birds. There is little doubt that he is the most spectacular warrior, but there are still more tasks to come before Hercules can be freed from his assignments, as decreed by the oracle, and free himself completely from Hera's curse. Hercules and the 7th to 12th Labours from Stories of Greece, written by Templeton Institute for Neurology, narrated by Catherine Carter. After successfully completing 6 of the 12 seemingly impossible tasks set to him by King Eurystheus and the spiteful Hera, Hercules must labour on. He knows that this is not going to get any easier, but he is determined to carry out each one so that one day he can be released from the curse of Hera's hatred. He knows that more than ever he must stay alert and focused, and most of all, he must hold on to the courage that has made him the most fearless of all warriors. Hercules received word from Eurystheus that his 7th task is to travel to Crete to capture the Cretan bull. He was now well recovered from his dangerous and painful encounter with the wild boar, and thankfully had fully regained his strength. The Cretan bull was a gift from Poseidon, the god of the sea, to King Minos of Crete. You see, King Minos felt that he was a favourite of the gods, so he asked Poseidon to grant him a bull to come from the sea. In exchange, Minos would sacrifice the bull back to Poseidon as a sign of his dedication to the god. This is how things worked in those ancient days, when the gods were so all-powerful. If you were careful not to upset them, you could do very well. But as you have seen already, if you showed them any disrespect, you would soon feel the power of their anger. Poseidon agreed and sent a beautiful bull to the king. This bull was a huge but handsome creature, with long, majestic, silvery horns and snow-white skin. It was such a fine specimen, in fact, that Minos had second thoughts about sacrificing it back. So he decided against it, and instead the king sacrificed a different, plain, ordinary bull to Poseidon. Understandably, Poseidon was furious. He decided that if the bull was too beautiful to be sacrificed, it was beautiful enough to fall in love with. So he cast a spell on King Minos' wife, Pasiphae, making her think the bull was human, so she would fall in love with it, which she did. The result was that she later gave birth to the first Minotaur, the creature with the head of a bull and the body of a man. We will have a story about the fascinating Minotaur later in our Greek mythology series. The Cretan bull was a gentle creature to begin with, but when King Minos upset Poseidon, the angry god also made the bull insane. It ran wild through all of Crete, knocking down walls, destroying crops, and chasing townsfolk and causing general destruction. Hercules sailed to Crete and set off to find the bull. He found it drinking from a water spring and snuck up behind it. He grabbed the bull by the horns and wrestled it to the ground, then tied it up so it could not escape. He decided not to kill the bull, as he knew that it was born a beautiful and gentle creature, and had been driven mad by a curse from a god, much like Hercules himself when Hera had cursed him. He took it back to Mycenae and tied it to the gates of the city. King Eurystheus wanted to present the beautiful bull to Hera as a gift, but she refused. She wanted no gift that would honour Hercules in any way. Remember, children, she hated Hercules with a passion, but Hercules didn't care. He had completed the task that was asked of him and wanted to move on to the next. The next task was the 8th, and it was to capture and bring back the 4 mares of Diomedes. But these were no ordinary horses, they were savage, man-eating mares which enjoyed feasting on human flesh. Diomedes, who owned the horses, was the king of Bristones, and he was a fearsome and cruel warrior. When newcomers would arrive in his kingdom, Diomedes would pretend to welcome them, then feed them to his horses. When Hercules arrived in Bristones to carry out his task, the king already had soldiers waiting to stop him. There was a fierce battle, and Hercules overpowered all the soldiers and eventually killed Diomedes. He then fed the body of Diomedes to his own horses. Once the animals had eaten their previous owner, they became calm and lost all their ferociousness. From that day, they would never eat human flesh again. Hercules took the mares back to Eurystheus, who had no idea that they were no longer man-eaters. He was terrified and hid in his bronze jar to escape them and Hercules. Hercules found this quite funny, and he set them free to roam the countryside in peace. For his 9th labour, Eurystheus ordered Hercules to bring him the belt of the warrior Hippolyte. There was no ordinary belt and no ordinary warrior. Hippolyte was queen of the Amazons, a tribe of women warriors. The name Amazon was from a Greek word meaning missing one breast. This is because once their breasts had fully grown, they had the right one removed, because it got in the way when throwing a spear. The Amazons lived apart from men, and if they ever gave birth to children, they kept only the females and raised them to be warriors like themselves. Queen Hippolyte had a special piece of armour, a leather belt that had been given to her by Ares, the war god. As a gift for being the best warrior of all the Amazons, she wore this belt across her chest and used it to carry her sword and spear. Eurystheus wanted Hippolyte's belt as a present to give to his daughter. After a long journey, Hercules reached the land of the Amazons and cast anchor at the harbour. When Hercules got off the boat, Hippolyte came down to greet him. She asked him why he had come, and when he explained his mission to her, she promised to give him the belt. But the goddess Hera would not allow this to happen. She had no intention of making it easy for Hercules. So she disguised herself as an Amazon warrior and lied to them, saying that Hercules had come to kidnap Hippolyte. The Amazons put on their armour and there was a huge battle. Hercules managed to overpower all the warriors, and finally he faced Hippolyte in a one-on-one fight. He had her pinned to the ground with his sword raised, but he could not bring himself to kill her. Instead, he slipped the belt from her body and left the land of the Amazons to take the belt back to Eurystheus. To carry out his 10th labour, Hercules had to journey to the end of the world to bring back the cattle of the monster Geryon. Geryon lived on an island called Erythea. He had 3 heads and 3 sets of legs, all joined at the waist. Geryon kept a herd of red cattle guarded by Orpheus, a 2-headed hound. Hercules reached the island of Erythea and almost immediately was attacked by the 2-headed hound. Hercules bashed the monster with his club, and just as he was escaping with the cattle, Geryon arrived and tried to stop him. Hercules fought with him and shot him dead with his arrows. Stealing the cattle was the easy part, dear children. Getting the cattle back to Greece proved more difficult. During the sea voyage, Poseidon, the god of the sea, sent 2 of his sons to try to steal the cattle from Hercules, and another fierce battle began. during which Hercules killed Poseidon's sons. One of the bulls jumped from the ship and swam to Sicily, and then made its way to the neighbouring country. By the way, children, the native word for bull was Italus, and so the country came to be named after the bull, and was called Italy. Hercules couldn't return without all of the cattle, and this was part of his task, so he had to sail to Italy to recapture the bull. The entire journey back took a whole year. Poor Hercules had been labouring for 8 years and 1 month to perform all these tasks. He was tired but determined to finish, so that he could be free to live his life the way he wanted. So eventually Hercules was ready to face the 11th task. Hercules was told to bring Eurystheus the golden apples of Hesperides, which belonged to Zeus, his own father, the king of the gods. Now the problem here was that Hera herself had given these apples to Zeus as a wedding gift, so surely this task was going to prove impossible. Remember, Hera hated Hercules and did not want to see him succeed, so how was he ever going to steal one of her prized possessions? Surely it couldn't be done. The apples were kept in a garden at the northern edge of the world, and they were guarded not only by a 100-headed dragon named Ladon, but also by the Hesperides, nymphs who were daughters of Atlas, the Titan who held the sky and the earth upon his shoulders. Another problem was that Hercules did not know where the garden was, and he had to journey through many countries and face several battles along the way to find it. Finally, Hercules came to the rock on Mount Caucasus, where he happened upon Prometheus. Prometheus had angered Zeus many years before, and as punishment he had been chained to the rock, where every day a monstrous bird came and pecked at his body. Once the bird had flown off, his body would heal, but the next day he had to put up with its painful visit all over again. This went on for 30 years, but when Hercules arrived, he killed the bird and freed Prometheus. In gratitude, he told Hercules that the secret to getting the apples was to send Atlas after them. After all, Atlas could talk his own daughters, the nymph, into letting him into the garden, where he could take the apples. I will just explain, dear children, that Atlas was one of the Titans who had been condemned to hold up the sky and the earth on his shoulders, a job he hated. Atlas was overjoyed because in order to take on this task, he would have to pass his burden over to Hercules while he was gone, so Hercules agreed to hold up the world for him while he went to get the apples. When Atlas returned, he had no intention of resuming his burden, so he told Hercules he would take the apples back to Eurystheus himself. But Hercules outsmarted Atlas. He pretended to agree, but asked Atlas whether he'd give him back the world just for a moment, while he put some soft padding on his shoulders to help him bear the weight. Atlas put the apples on the ground and shifted the burden back onto his own shoulders. This is when Hercules picked up the apples and quickly ran off, carrying them back to Eurystheus. Finally, Hercules faced his 12th and final and most dangerous labour. He was to go to the underworld and capture the beast called Kerberos. The ancient Greeks believed that after a person died, his or her spirit lived for eternity in the depths of the earth. The underworld was ruled by Hades, the brother of the mighty Zeus. Depending on how a person lived his or her life, they might or might not experience never-ending punishment in Hades. All souls, whether good or bad, were destined for the kingdom of Hades. Kerberos was a vicious 3-headed dog-like beast with a dragon tail. He guarded the entrance to Hades and kept the living from entering the world of the dead. Through a deep, rocky cave, Hercules made his way down to the underworld, where most Hades and Kerberos stood waiting for him. Hades knew of Hercules' tasks and agreed to allow him to fight the best Kerberos on 2 conditions. 1. He must do it with no weapons whatsoever. 2. If he won the battle, he could take Kerberos above ground to present him to the king, but then he must return the creature to the underworld. Hercules agreed. With a renewed strength and fierce determination, he threw himself at the creature, grabbing all 3 heads at once. He wrestled it to the ground and held it steady, but the monster's dragon tail wrapped itself around Hercules' neck, choking him. They fought on until the night and well into the next day, with Hercules using only his brute strength to overcome the monster. Finally, victorious but exhausted, Hercules carried Cerberus back to King Eurystheus, who came to the gates of the city to see for himself. Now that Hercules had done his penance, Eurystheus had no choice but to release Hercules from the contract that bound him and award the hero his freedom according to the word of the oracle.